Throughout my life, Spider-Man has always been a character that I thought I could always look up to. As somebody that went through a lot of bullying growing up, I always found a character of Peter Parker as somebody I could see myself in. In fact, I remember when I was younger, I had a big encyclopedia of everything Spider-Man related, and I would constantly look into it whenever I was on the weekends after school. So compared to some of the other comic book superheroes, Spider-Man was arguably the one that I'm most knowledgeable in, which really demonstrates just how iconic he was as the first teenage superhero. Sadly, I couldn't say the same for his games. Now granted, the video games have been improving with the recently released Marvel's Spider-Man 2 from Insomniac Games, but would you believe that there was a time when Spider-Man games were considered less than ideal? These days, everybody likes to sing the praises of Web of Shadows, but I remember a time when the critics panned it, saying things like the open world's New York was getting too old and tedious to traverse in, the missions were repetitive, etc., etc. So, in response to the criticism, the cunts at Activision hired Beanox, which was the company that brought you the microtransaction-riddled Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, to make a Spider-Man game that was a bit more linear. However, in order to compensate for the varied exploration taken away, they decided to give 4 different Spider-Men to play as, which were all based on different iterations of the character. I guess from my own personal experience, when I was younger, this game bored the hell out of me because I thought it was too button-mashy and it got repetitive to play through, but playing it now, I guess it's fine? Maybe it's a bit better compared to when I was a teenager. I mean, people no longer hate Web of Shadows anymore, but as for this game, I'm not sure what the common consensus is now. One interesting fact is that this game inspired the story for the comic series Spider-Verse, which eventually led to the inspiration of the movie Into the Spider-Verse. So whatever you might think of it, the current Spider-Man legacy owes a lot to Shattered Dimensions. But that doesn't always equal quality, and Shattered Dimensions has a lot of glaring issues that really hold it back from being amazing. And one of these is the piss-poor story. So Dan Slott was the writer for this game, so I did a quick research on what he wrote, and apparently he authored Superior Spider-Man. And if you're a Spider-Man fan, you know which one I'm talking about. Perhaps that already raised an eyebrow for me. So the game begins with Mysterio breaking into a museum and getting thwarted by Spider-Man. In a vain attempt to block an incoming punch, he picks up a tablet, and a wall crawler ends up smashing it, which seems to give Mysterio special powers. Spider-Man is then contacted by Madam Web, who informs him that what he broke wasn't just any old tablet, but a tablet of order and chaos, which was what bound the different universes together. So since it's been scattered throughout several dimensions, 3 other versions of Spider-Man, which include 2099, Noir, and Ultimate, must work together with the Amazing counterpart in order to gather up the pieces from different villains and repair it back together. Meanwhile, Mysterio now has the power of a true sorcerer instead of a mere illusionist, and it becomes even more of a threat. Okay, so that's pretty much the crux of the story. Honestly, I've never encountered a story just so fucking paper thin. And you're telling me Dan Slott wrote this? You can tell based on how simple this all is that Dan Slott didn't give a damn about the game he's writing for. So, where to start? Well, first of all, it's not really clear to me what Spider-Man shattering the tablet has anything to do of significance. Madam Web merely says something about the individual dimensions being destroyed if Spider-Man doesn't gather them fast enough, but it's so vague that it doesn't make me care about the situation at hand. And then I have to mention Mysterio. After he gets his sorcerer powers, he doesn't really do anything to be a direct influence on the conflict. I guess later in the middle of the game, he threatens to kill Madam Web, and he's able to get his hands on the full tablet to become a godlike giant to rule all dimensions, but it happens so late in the game that it doesn't quite hit home. It would have upped the stakes quite a bit if Mysterio had become a divine giant in the beginning. That would have given a sense of desperation for the Spider-Men to collect the tablet pieces, for Mysterio's threat would have been hanging over their heads. But alas, such wasn't meant to be. Now, granted, even when the game was first released, a lot of critics took down the story as being too simple, but today, it's really no better. What's worse is that Miguel O'Hara and Peter Parker's alternate versions aren't explored. The soul behind Spider-Man has always been the ordinary man behind the mask. Peter Parker was designed to be relatable, so when Shattered Dimensions doesn't emphasize that, even while staying true to the wisecracking nature of Spider-Man, they've missed the mark in depicting his character. So the story obviously needed more fleshing out, but there are other areas in the presentation that Shattered Dimensions excels at, such as how it expressed the concept of the multiverse. For all the bitching I've been going on about the story, the way that Shattered Dimensions tries to distinguish the different universes is pretty cool. They each have their own distinct art style, voice actors, and gameplay elements. Spider-Man Noir uses a lot of hand-drawn illustrations to depict the gothic, drab version of Manhattan. 2099 is more metropolitan with a lot of towering skyscrapers and vehicles running in traffic. Amazing Spider-Man feels like I'm running around in an animated 60s comic, and Ultimate Spider-Man kind of looks like a modernized CGI cartoon like something I'd see in Spider-Man, the new animated series. But I think it's the inclusion of the different voice actors that sticks out the most to me. You've got Christopher Daniel Barnes from the 90s cartoon, Josh Keaton from the Spectacular Spider-Man, Neil Patrick Harris from the new animated series, and Dan Gilvison from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. To be honest, I don't know everything about the Spider-Man shows. The only ones I'm familiar with are Spectacular Spider-Man and a new animated series. I wouldn't call myself a Spider-Man TV nerd. Guess that makes me a filthy casual. Okay, I see myself. But anyway, Beanox made a great choice in making all the voice actors come from Spider-Man TV shows because it provides a lot of fan service. It really makes Shattered Dimensions feel like a Spider-Man game. I mean, previously they shoehorned guys like James Arnold Taylor in Friend or Foe, not to diss James Arnold Taylor as a voice actor, but because he never appeared in any of the other Spider-Man titles, he just sort of felt like a random pick. So maybe Spider-Man was a bit lacking when it came to how he was depicted as a character, but they certainly nailed how he ought to sound so that it at least feels like him. Speaking of James Arnold Taylor, David Kaye plays the role of Mysterio, who also voices Clank. Seriously, if I didn't know any better, I wouldn't have been able to make the connection between the two. But every time Mysterio talked, I couldn't help but think about Clank. I don't know, just something I thought was worth mentioning. Since we're on the topic of villains, a lot of the bad guys have been evolved based on the dimension they're from. So Kraven is just normal Kraven in the Amazing Universe, while Scorpion is literally a humongous beast from Spider-Man 2099's dimension instead of being Mac Gargan in a suit. The Vulture went from being Adrian Toomes to a man-eating golem that murdered Uncle Ben. They are all very creative reiterations, but some of them aren't even in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, which is strange because Spider-Man is known to have a vast array of villains. Deadpool isn't really somebody I'd consider to be a villain, more of an anti-hero. And Juggernaut, while he does have his respective appearance in that one issue where he tried to kidnap Madam Web, is an X-Men villain. Considering how expansive the overall Spider-Man Rogues Gallery is, I'm surprised they didn't take the time to add somebody like Rhino, or Spencer Smith, or Molten Man, or Kingpin, or anybody in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. As a matter of fact, I did a bit of research on some of the incarnations to these villains, and the Scorpion from 2099 was actually more of a minor villain. The wiki goes so far as to call him the most embarrassing Spider-Man villain in that dimension, so I kind of wonder why Beanox went out of their way to add somebody like him into the mix, instead of having a villain that was better. But besides these nitpicks, I actually quite enjoyed the fact that Beanox got creative with how they depicted each of these antagonists. I just wish they'd have made less questionable choices. Of course, the other big differences that these dimensions had are the gameplay aspects. And honestly, it's pretty well done. On paper, that is. So the whole point with Shattered Dimensions is that each of the Spider-Men have their own individual playstyles. Amazing Spider-Man uses web-based attacks, so he can make his webs come out as fists and hammers and smash them against his foes. Noir makes use of stealth instead of trying to take out his enemies head-on. 2099 has a lot of free-falling areas where he's forced to dash in a linear direction while avoiding debris and other obstacles, and he can slow down time to defeat fast-moving enemies. And Ultimate Spider-Man makes use of the symbiote to unleash tendril attacks, and also has a rage mode that he can activate to unleash devastating blows. Honestly, my favorite of the four. So that sounds like a lot of differences among the four Spider-Men. However, the only one that has the most pronounced playstyle is Spider-Man Noir, as all the other Spider-Men play too similarly to the amazing counterpart. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it really shows how Shattered Dimensions manages to stick to its core gameplay of being a beat-em-up. As a matter of fact, it probably wouldn't be so great if they were all completely different, because it would have given the feeling that Beanox was trying to cram 4 games into one. However, their individual attributes could have made more of a prevalence in the overall level design. Take 2099 skydiving levels. You'll be doing these a lot in his initial fight with the Hobgoblin, in which the game makes you get on his back and beat him down, but with the levels that feature the Scorpion and Dr. Octopus, there's only one skydiving section shoehorned in. Because of this, the game doesn't do a good job at teaching you how to use it. So when you have to use it in the final boss, in which you have to fly through rings with tiny openings and avoid fireballs coming at max speed, it ends up being too much that you fucking throw your controller at the TV and turn the damn thing off. Just kidding, I was able to beat this game. But my point is that 2099 needed more skydiving sections in order to teach a player how to use it before expecting us to fight a boss with it. Contrastly, Noir had been using his stealth mechanics a lot throughout his levels. In fact, it's the entire focus. Sadly, they're imperfect with how they were executed. It often feels like the guards can detect you from a mile away, even when you're not within the radius of their flashlight. Also, some of them are very much hidden from clear view, which means that at times, when you're swinging around, a guard might unexpectedly catch you. In a way, they kind of blend into the environment. Trying to engage with the guards head-on usually doesn't work too well, since they have a tendency to knock you back in the middle of a combo, and the bullets will tear into Spider-Man's HP. While these are good features since they force you to be stealthy, the stealth sadly isn't done well, which made Spider-Man Noir the least enjoyable of the four. Maybe one thing that could have fixed this is to make the shadows more prominent in order to distinguish from the light areas. The colors sort of bled into one another, so when I thought I was hiding in the darkness, I'd still get caught. There could have maybe have been some kind of icon to indicate a distinction between the two. That would have improved the stealth immensely by preventing so many instances of me questioning why a guard found me. The only time where this was really apparent was in the Green Goblin level, where the fireworks created some clearly lit areas, but this was also a problem because the switch between light and darkness was so sudden. So, there were times where I'd be trying to sneak up on a guard, then a firework goes off and I'm caught. Sometimes you'll even get caught while doing a stealth takedown. Big idea? It's unpolished. All that being said, while my negativity generally goes towards 2099 and Noir, Amazing and Ultimate were generally more enjoyable to play. I particularly really liked Ultimate Spider-Man, mainly because it was an even better version of the Amazing Spider-Man's gameplay. Not only can you do some really devastating tendril attacks that just fucks your foes up, but you also get Rage Mode. Ultimate Spider-Man succumbs to the influence of the symbiote and basically goes all out with his attacks. His tendrils extend in length, and it's just a total button mash fest as you plow through waves of enemies like they're nothing. Bosses literally become a joke with Rage Mode. Ultimate Spider-Man is the GOAT when it comes to the four, because there's just a sense of power when playing as him. The symbiote suit always fed on Peter's emotions, fueling his anger, and Ultimate Spider-Man's gameplay exhibits that very well. Amazing Spider-Man is the plainest of the bunch, obviously considering that he's based off of the Earth 616, which is like the normal dimension. As mentioned previously, the main gimmick with him is that he uses a lot of web constructs in combat. I guess it's kind of cool seeing the many different types of weapons Spider-Man can create, like a club or dual mallets, but in a way, he's just a watered-down version of the latter, a typical beat-em-up without the gimmick of obliterating all your foes without mercy. So these gameplay distinctions are surface level at best. With the exception of Spider-Man Noir, they're all beat-em-ups. Luckily, Beanox gave more variety and a vast array of moves to unlock as you progress through the game. As you finish the Web of Destiny challenges, you accumulate points to spend for different upgrades. Some of my notable favorites included the ability to pounce your enemies several times on a strand of webbing. You can do this to accumulate combo points very easily. So if you're wondering how to accomplish that one trophy where you have to get a 200 plus combo, this is the move to use. Plus, it's just very funny watching your enemies be juggled as if they're a bouncy ball. The threat they once posed is no longer there once they turn into literal playthings. Another fun one was the spin attack. Now, it kind of has a very weird button combo to execute in order to bring it about, which is a combination of triangle and circle, but if you are able to pull it off, Spider-Man can charge through waves of enemies while spinning like a razor-sharp-edged disc. I found myself using this a lot in the amazing section of the final boss battle because it was really good at clearing up mobs. These enemies tend to really charge towards you, and without good crowd control, you'll be dying a lot during this part, so just spamming the spin attack was a satisfying way of clearing them out. Sure, maybe it looks like I'm relying a lot on dominant strats, but it gets the job done. I also had a lot of enjoyment with the grab swirl, which allowed me to twirl my enemies around and throw them into the abyss, and the spider stomp is also good for breaking up crowds. So it doesn't feel like pressing square all the time. Shattered Dimensions' combat provides situations where the game encourages you to change it up, unlike a certain Legend of Spyro. For the most part, this adds a lot of good variety, but what they could have done to make the differences more distinctive to the four Spider-Men is to make certain moves be specific to one of them. I guess they sort of do this considering Spider-Man Noir can't perform some abilities, but they could have gone further by making some of them only accessible to one of the Spider-Men. Again, it would have allowed there to be greater distinction that didn't involve completely changing the core gameplay, so it was a bit of a missed opportunity. But while the combat is solid enough to carry itself out on its own, the level design is not. So, after so many people bitched about the fact that Spider-Man games used the open-world sandbox New York too much, Shattered Dimensions decided to go in the other direction and make everything linear, very akin to the 90s PS1 Spider-Man game. You know, the real irony with all this is that they eventually went back to creating the open city of New York in future titles, which maybe shows that this failed. Well, for what it's worth, the linear levels aren't very problematic. As a matter of fact, the game makes good use by inserting a lot of hidden collectibles like the tokens and hidden spiders. As I mentioned before, there are those Web of Destiny challenges, and some of them require you to approach a level in a different way, like doing a stealth takedown close up, or defeating the Deadpool clones in a particular order. However, this isn't enough to mitigate the fact that all these levels are basically structured the same no matter which dimension you're in. In every level, Spider-Man gives chase to a villain. There's one normal boss fight in the middle of the round, and a final battle in which the villain uses a tablet on him or herself to make themselves stronger. It's cowardly how the enemies just keep running away from you, and maybe even mitigates them as a threat to an extent. Although, that's not the most irritating aspect of these levels. The most irksome aspect has a lot to do with the fact that so many of them have menial tasks like destroying cameras or dousing foes with water. But the worst of them all were the ones where you had to save people. Seriously, every time this game required me to rescue someone, I just rolled my eyes and thought, for the love of fucking God, how many goddamn people do I need to save? It's not that the process of saving people is challenging, but it did get really repetitive having to do it over and over and over and over again. It gets even worse when you have to protect them from hordes of enemies. If you want my recommendation, don't play this game on hard mode. In fact, I might go out of my way to say that platinuming this game isn't worth it, because one of the trophies requires you to get the highest ranking medal on all 12 levels on hard mode. Fuck that! So there are so many instances where you have to defend this group of scientists from several waves of enemies, whether that be the scorpion larva or symbiote-possessed shield agents. The problem with this is that there are so many fucking enemies crowding the screen. I mean, maybe if there was like a co-op mode that could help you clear away these guys, then it would make sense to make you face large mobs, but this was just too much. One part in particular was when you had to protect the two scientists from the multiple scorpions. Either the scorpions left me with a cinch of my health, or they killed off the scientists. I can't understand what Beanox was thinking when they added so many enemies. It gets even worse when you have to put up with the scientists just non-stop bitching about how they cannot do their job with all the bugs trying to maul them. I mean, I kind of understand that you're in distress, but it added more to the goddamn annoyance of these parts. These parts literally felt like such pace killers when you were just trying to progress through the level. Another thing that might be relatively minor, but I felt was worth talking about, are the glitches. Now, I can't find any definitive proof that Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions was rushed, but there were some weird glitches that almost made it seem as if the game was unfinished. There's nothing that breaks the game or prevents me from finishing it, but there are some that nearly kept me from completing the level. Interestingly, these mostly happened to me when I was fighting bosses. The first glitch I encountered was that the next sequence for Electro wouldn't initiate. He'd freeze in place for a while, and it took me a couple minutes for me to realize that the game soft-locked in the middle of the fight. Another issue happened during the Green Goblin fight as Spider-Man Noir. What's supposed to happen is that you wait for the Goblin to move out of the spotlight before doing a stealth takedown. But for some reason, even when the Goblin was in the darkness, he still behaved as if I wasn't pulling the stealth takedown correctly. As a matter of fact, this caused webs to sprout out of the wrists of Spider-Man, and I actually thought that the main strategy was to wrap them around something in order to trip the Goblin up. Hey, don't blame me, it's what you would have thought too if you saw something like this. Since we're on the topic of bosses, I might as well move on to them. So, this is actually considered to be the highlight for Shattered Dimensions to many professional critics like IGN. If you ask me, I don't really see the big deal with them other than that they're far too frequent. They each have two fights, one where you battle them without the tablet, and the other where you do so when they're under its influence. For the most part, they're relatively standard beat-em-up bosses, in which you have to wait for when your foe is vulnerable to attack them. In fact, some of their final forms are interesting, such as when Sandman develops a bit of a multiple personality disorder from having several different faces, or Hammerhead literally going around with a devastating arm cannon. Which I find to be unfitting because Hammerhead's specialty is his steel skull. It would have made more sense to maybe make his entire body metallic as his special form. Deadpool was my favorite out of all of them, mainly because his gimmick of splitting into multiple selves fit the charm of the anti-hero that broke the fourth wall, and his entire level felt the most creative with its focus of walking into a reality TV show. I wish more of the game's levels and bosses were like this, because it feels like most of the imagination went into this one in particular, whereas the others weren't thought out very well. Like, maybe Vulture does something interesting with the lights, and with Scorpion, the fight tested your reflexes, but it's not really something that stands out in the game like the twats at IGN claim. Rather, the thing that is worth mentioning are the different features of these bosses. Spider-Man will sometimes go into first-person perspective to give his villains a beatdown. This is cool in concept. Watching Spider-Man pummel his enemies in a first-person perspective does change the fight up a little, but there is more to be desired from it. The pattern is always the same. Press the analog sticks to mindlessly punch him, and actually hold them back to dodge an incoming attack. It's too simply designed. One way that this could have been fixed is if you had the opportunity to switch between different buttons, instead of having to lock the analog sticks backwards all the time to dodge the attacks. That could have made the boss fight a tad bit more interesting. I guess one comparison to this is Kingdom Hearts 2's reaction commands, in which it was the simple press of a triangle button that caused Sora or Roxas to do a special move. The difference is that while those usually added more to the overall combat, these parts felt more shoehorned in because there literally is not variation as to how these play out. They are an extra tidbit in the battles that did more to drag out the fight than add something meaningful. So you might think that I absolutely hate the living fuck out of Shattered Dimensions. And I don't. If I were to describe it, Shattered Dimensions is like biting into a sandwich with moldy cheese. All the ingredients are there, the lettuce, the tomatoes, the mayo, it all makes for a good sandwich. But the cheese is moldy, and even though this might be nothing more than one ingredient, it ruins the whole sandwich. Shattered Dimensions has all the parts that make a good game. However, the problems rear their ugly head a little too much to the point that it made me wonder, why the hell is this in the game? It's wondering how this was the game that was said to have saved the Spider-Man games from dismal doom. I think it's even more interesting how Web of Shadows used to be severely panned by critics, but now people are coming back to it and realizing it's actually a very solid experience. Shattered Dimensions definitely seems to be showing its age with repetitive level designs and unrefined mechanics, but I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't have fun while playing this game. Honestly, in a way, Shattered Dimensions was a unique experiment, not just for the Spider-Man games, but also for the Spider-Man franchise. It was the first Spider-Man game that actually tried to break away from that free-roaming New York-style sandbox gameplay. And, well, that clearly didn't work out too well considering that future games eventually went back to it. But it also was the first game to make use of the multiverse, and this eventually led to Dan Slott's Spider-Verse comic series, which eventually drew in inspiration to create the Into the Spider-Verse movies. So, in a way, the fact that Shattered Dimensions was trying to do something different is an aspect I give it credit for. A for effort, for lack of a better term. At the end of the day, it succeeded in giving us one of the best Spider-Man franchises, and it maybe even had a hand in creating today's obsession with a multiverse. So for all its flaws, it still left behind quite a legacy for the web-slinger, as unlikely as it was.
I'm the best! And so ends one of the most titanic team-ups of all time. And what have we learned here today, Marvelites? That no matter what corner of the cosmos you may find yourself in, there'll always be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man to save the day. And to all of you web-spinning wonders, I proudly say, Excelsior!